Welcome to this week's Contemporary Halacha Shir. As always, we try and find a halachic topic related to the coming week's Sedra, but this week is slightly different because Purim follows very soon after this week's Parsha Tetzaveh, and therefore instead I'd like to focus on a fascinating question in halacha regarding something to do with Purim. The shir is entitled Muddled Mishloach Manos. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. So before we get into the specific fascinating question, let's just take a bit of background. The background is in box 1 from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Shlach Manos. What is the basic halacha? Says the Kitzur in Siman Kuf Mem Beis Sif Aleph, Chayev kol adam lishlach lochal hapachos la'adam echad shtei matanos. So the person is obligated on Purim, man and a woman, to send lochal hapachos at least to one person two matanos. How do I know that? Dichsivu mishleach monois ish l'reyehu. Monois is in the plural, and ish l'reyehu mashma shtei matanos le'echad. Two portions of food le'echad. And of course, there is a myth that you've got to have two separate brachas. It is exactly that. It is a myth. And the more you send, the better. However, says the Kitzur, famously, if you've got a budget, then certainly you should increase the matanos levyonim than to have a very fancy suda or to send a lot of mishlach manos. Because in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is a much greater, it gives greater joy to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to gladden the hearts of aniyim, of poor people, of Yisomim and almonas. And a person who gladdens those who are sort of downtrodden, as it were, is acting in a godlike manner. So, says the Kitzur, there is a basic obligation on every person to send shlach manos, which is two portions to one person, and it's better to try and increase matanos levyonim than to have to spend the money on a larger suda or more shlach manos. Now, then in Sif Beis, what counts as food, as for the shlach manos, it's got to be ready to go. Things which are ready to eat without any further preparation. Could go in boss of a dogim of a shalom, cooked meat and fish, v'lo chaim, but not raw because that needs cooking. Or mine masika, or sweet things, or pears, or fruit, or kos yayin, or wine, or meidvash v'chayetzi bay. Okay, good. Now, one other introduction, and that is that do you actually have to use a shliach or not? So the Mechaber says in Hilchos Purim, in Tov Reish Sadi Hey Siv Dalet, Chayev lishloach lechaver shtei manos basa oimine oichlim. A person is obligated to send two types of meat. So you see, therefore, the same bracha. Oishal mine oichlim shenema mishlach manos ish reyehu shtei manos ish echad. So that's the Shulchan Aruch which we just referred to. And then on that, the Mishnah Berurah says in Sivkot Yudches, Lishloach, on the word to send, he brings the tshuvas of the Binyan Tzion, who says that nistapik im hevi ba'atzmei hamonos v'lo dishliach iyotze. He is mesupuk. The Binyan Tzion is mesupuk if a person brings the shlach manos himself and not by way of a shliach, if he has fulfilled his obligation. D'chsivu mishloach name the bo'in and dafkar de shlichus, that perhaps you need a dafkar de shlichus. And la halacha, the Chasam Sofer says in Gittin and Chaf Beis that it's certainly preferred, but you fulfilled your obligation if you do it personally, and then I think that is the contemporary view. Now, let us go to this fascinating case of a muddled mishloach manos. It comes from Rabbi Zilberstein, and this is from a sefer called Mea Sha'arim in Siman Kuf Vav. Maisa, the following story happened. Beruven she'echad min mishpachto ichala. Reuven, sadly, somebody in his home got sick. Va'avra alav tkufa kasha ma'id. Says Rabbi Zilberstein that this fellow, Reuven, a person in his household became ill, and Reuven went through a very difficult time. He had to sort of be the liaison with the doctors, with the medical team. And he had to also tend to the patient, his family member who was ill, and be at the hospital and the bedside. And he had to also take care of the house, to continue running of the home. V'hinei Shimon ish chesed, and there was a fellow out there. He called him Shimon, an ish chesed, bole ezrasei b'shatoi hakosha, who came to help out Reuven in the time of need. Ve'ozrei b'chol hatzarich, and he helped him in all types of ways. Ve'hichlit Reuven nishlach lebepur mishlach monos mefua. And Reuven was so grateful, he wanted to send Shimon a very fancy shlach monos. Ve'hechim mishlach monos gadol hakoilel es kol sudas purim. And he sent him not only a very beautiful, elaborate shlach monos, but it actually had all of the sudas purim there as well. Chalas, dogim, basa, chalas and fish and meat. A very elaborate shlach monos, which had everything that Shimon would need for the Purim Suda. For Hizman Reuven shliach, and Reuven got hold of a shliach, sheyikach es hamishloach monos ve'yavirim l'Shimon, to take this very fancy shlach monos to Shimon. Ba'is binyan sheShimon gar. You can see what's going to happen now. In the building where Shimon lived, gar sham gam Levi. Another fellow lived there. His name was Levi. Sheshem mishpachtoi zah l'shem mishpachtoi shel Shimon. It was a similar type of name to Shimon's name. In other words, I don't know, he doesn't say who, but let's say Shimon was Greenberg and Levi was Greenblatt. V'gam Levi hayedida shel Reuven, and Levi was also a friend of Reuven. V'ashliach ta'ah, and the shliach made a mistake. U'b'malkum la'aviyo l'Shimon heviyo l'Levi. And instead of delivering this fancy shlach monos to Shimon, the intended recipient, he delivered it to Levi. Levi suddenly receives this very fancy shlach monos, and he's delighted, because he didn't think Reuven liked him so much, but he was delighted. And he's got not only all that delicious food, but he's got Purim sort of ready to go. So the story continues, next paragraph. Reuven shehimtin l'sichas telefon mishimon ka'is todah l'mishlach monos. So Reuven is waiting for a phone call or a message from Shimon to thank him, to acknowledge this very beautiful shlach monos. And when it didn't happen, it didn't come, Shimon wasn't in touch, hiskasha l'shliach v'shalom heve I think, he v'oz his barat atos. And basically, he called Shimon and said, did you deliver it? Because he called Levi, he called the shliach and said, did you deliver it? Because I'm waiting for a call from Shimon to thank me, and I haven't received anything. And then the mistake emerged. He said, where did you deliver it to? Oh, I delivered it to Levi, not to Shimon. And the mistake was found. And in the meantime, when I guess he called the shliach, he told the shliach, well, can you retrieve it? Can you go to Levi and can you get it back? And explain to him it was a mistake and that you, the shliach, messed up. So he did that. So in time, Levi ocheles kol shliach monos. And then Levi by that time had eaten the shlach monos. So just to summarize this story, what have we said? Reuven was going through a very difficult patch. A family member was in hospital. He was split between the hospital, consulting with the doctors, running the home. And Shimon came to his rescue and helped him out in all different manners of way. And he wanted to thank him. So Reuven got him a very elaborate shlach monos, not only just delicious food, but also enough for the Purim Suda. He appointed a shliach to go deliver it for him, and the shliach messed up. He delivered it not to Shimon, but to Levi, who was also, a friend of Reuven. So therefore, when he received it, he didn't think it was untoward. And he was ecstatic about it, because not only did he have a beautiful shlach monos, he had the beautiful Suda as well. And then when Reuven was waiting for this thank you from Shimon, nothing came. He checked with the shliach, and the mistake came to light. That he, instead of delivering it to Shimon, he delivered it to Levi, by which time he said, well, go find out, go get it back and explain it was a mistake. But by that time, Levi had already eaten the shlach monos. Okay, so we've now got a whole bunch of questions. This is Geschmacka territory for a Purim Suda discussion, but what are the questions? What are the halachic questions that come to light? Well, Rabbi Silberstein sets them out for us. Last paragraph on paragraph number 3. Va'atzi yesh li histapek ha'im chayav Levi l'shalem Reuven es t'mei ha'mishlach monos. The first question is, does anybody have to pay damages to Reuven? First of all, maybe the shliach. Yeah, maybe the shliach should pay because he messed up. Instead of delivering it to Shimon, he delivered it to Levi. Or perhaps maybe Levi should be paying up, because maybe he ate something which wasn't intended for him. So Yeah, so maybe Levi's got to pay out because he ate something which wasn't intended for him. Or maybe the shliach who made a mistake has got to pay. That's question number one. So question number one, does anyone have to pay for damages to Reuven? Question number two, has Reuven fulfilled his obligation of shlach manos because they didn't go to the intended recipient? He didn't intend to send them to Levi. They ended up with him, but he intended for it to go to Shimon. So does that count? And third question, fascinating question. Levi consumed the shlach manos. Has he fulfilled his mitzvah of Sudas Purim? Because ultimately he ate something which wasn't intended for him and perhaps wasn't even his. So 3 questions regarding this case. Question number 1, does anybody have to pay damages to Reuven? If so, who? Is it Levi, the person who got them at the end, or perhaps the shliach who messed up and delivered it to the wrong address? Question number 2, has Reuven fulfilled his mitzvah of Mishlach Manos? And question number 3, has Levi fulfilled the mitzvah of Sudas Purim if the food wasn't really his? So, Rabbi Zilberstein goes through all 3 questions. Bottom box on the first page, paragraph 4. Legabe ha'she'ela, regarding the question, mi chayev l'shalem es ha'mishlach manos, who actually has to pay the shlach manos, Nira, it appears, she'kiven shel Levi nehene mishlach manos, since Levi benefited from the shlach manos, chayev l'shalem lo bossa bezol. He's got to pay what's called bossa bezol, which is brought in Shulchan Aruch. It comes up in different places in Shas. That here's the example that he brings. If a person passed away sadly, and then he has Yosomim, he has orphans, and he bequeathed them, or in his estate, as it were, was a cow that was lent to the dead father. And the kids thought, the orphans, the Yosomim, thought it actually belonged to the father. And they shechted this parah and they ate it, not realizing that actually it was lent to the father. It didn't actually belong to him. So what is the halacha? Who do they pay back the full amount? How does it work? So the Shulchan Aruch paskins meshalmim dmei bossa bezol. You pay the sort of the cheap value of the meat, shehu shnei shlishim, which is 2/3 of the value. So let's say the animal costs $600, so he'll pay $400. 2/3. Vashliach yeshalem es shlish hanoisa, and the shliach in this case pays the remaining third. In other words, Levi, who ate the shlach manos, he's not at fault, but he did benefit, and therefore Zilberstein says you apply the principle of paying Demei Bossa Bazol. He benefited, although he wasn't at fault, and therefore you pay the sort of, not the cost value, but it's Demei Bossa Bazol, which will be 2/3 of the value. So let's say this very grand, elaborate shlach manos costs $300, so then he'll have to pay $200. After all, he benefited and ate a very nice Purim Suda, so he pays 2/3. And the shliach, who's also at fault because he didn't deliver it to the correct address, he would have to pay the remaining third, the balance. Okay, that's one question. Now, if you turn over the page, look at paragraph 5. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein carries on and says this: so the Inyan im yotza Levi b'Sudas Purim, with regard to the question, has Levi fulfilled his mitzvah of Sudas Purim? After all, he ate something which perhaps wasn't his. So he says the following: B'shal shuvas machaneh chaim. He addresses this question because of, and he says the following: it could be that Levi has not fulfilled his obligation for his Purim Suda, because the meal ultimately, because the food wasn't his. And therefore it's got a status of a mitzvah ba'avera, and therefore you can't fulfill this mitzvah of Purim Suda by way of an avera, eating something which is not yours. Ulom, says Rabbi Zilberstein, Yitachen perhaps, Shekivin shela'ase konye b'shinui, since he ate the food, he chewed it, he therefore was koine b'shinui, he changed the status of the food, and therefore you can be koine with the shinui. In Kain, Kiyam is Sudas Purim. And perhaps therefore he has been Mekayim the mitzvah of Sudas Purim. V'docha, Shekivin sheksha'achlo li'ad l'shenim shalei, however, since when he ate them, he didn't know that it wasn't his. There wasn't the kavana to make a kinyan because he just thought they were his. Had he known that perhaps, let's say he was a ganef and he stole it from somebody, then you've got a shaila of a mitzvah b'avera. But you can be kind of something b'shinui, that I can acquire it because I transfer from the ownership from A to B. But here he didn't know that it wasn't his. V'siyam, and therefore he concludes shekivin she'odam roitz lasos mitzvah b'memona. Sorry, this must all be the Machne Chaim. That since a person, there is a presumption that a person wants to do a mitzvah with his money, that he would be eating the food that that it actually does belong to him. Therefore, the person who it does belong to, there is a presumed understanding that he does want the person who actually ate it to own it. That a mitzvah will be done with my property. So therefore, the person who did own it, let's say it was Shimon, or let's say perhaps even it was Reuven, whoever it was, they would want Levi to actually fulfill the mitzvah with their food, because that Levi will be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Sudas Purim. And therefore he concludes that indeed Levi has fulfilled his mitzvah of Sudas Purim. And the last question is, has Reuven fulfilled his mitzvah of Mishloach Manos? So in paragraph 6, the last box, he says this: it appears, since, as we said earlier, that between Levi and the Shliach, both of them have got to pay up. L'shalim the Reuven, Demei HaMonos, they've got to pay Reuven back the value of the Shlach Monos. Lo yotze Reuven yidei chovasei, shahar le nos Mishlach Monos. Since the halacha is that Levi and the Shliach together have got to reimburse Reuven for the full cost of the Mishloach Manos, therefore Reuven has not fulfilled his mitzvah of Mishloach Manos. So there we have it. A very, very interesting case of muddled Mishloach Manos. The case we're familiar with, and the three questions that arise is: does anyone have to pay damages? If so, is it Levi? Is it the Shliach? Has Reuven fulfilled the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos? Has Levi fulfilled the mitzvah of Sudas Purim? And as we discussed, those are the three questions with the answers which we've already described. Does anyone have to pay damages? Yeah, you've got to pay Demei Bosa Bazal, which means that Levi, who benefited, but true, he wasn't at full, but he benefited, he's got to pay 2/3 of the cost of the Mishloach Manos. The Shliach, who messed up, has got to pay the remaining third. And regarding, has Levi fulfilled his mitzvah of Sudas Purim? Well, the answer is yes, as we described from the Tshuva of the Machne Chaim, that he has. And lastly, has he fulfilled the Mishloach Manos? The answer is no. Because since Reuven has got to be reimbursed in halacha, therefore he didn't actually give any Mishloach Manos, because he got the whole thing back in compensation, and therefore he would not have fulfilled his mitzvah of Mishloach Manos with this particular Shlach Manos. Wishing everyone a Freiliche Purim.